It's more slopey than I thought. If you're still wondering about this cascading presentation, the good news is I think I figured it out. It's kind of like an American Idol audition. The bad news is I can't outspeak anybody on the list, so I'm aiming squarely for that so bad he's good category. Tom doesn't know it, but he and I share a unique bond thanks to CBE. You might think it's height, but you'd be mistaken. You might think it's hair care products, but you'd be very mistaken. You might think it's good taste in wives, but you'd be correct, except I don't think we met before we joined CBE. So you see, here at the conference, we are two proletariat peas and a cauldron of intelligentsia caviar. But we have a distinct advantage that PhDs have not envisioned in their darkest dreams. And that is diminished expectations. And that is an advantage I fully intend to avail myself of for the next 15 to 20 minutes. So a little bit about how I got here. I attended a small Christian college for my undergrad. I won't mention the name, but it is located in Wheaton, Illinois. Students there had an annoying habit of asking each other what they're going to be after graduation. So if you're wondering what the proper formula for the correct answer is, it's 9 parts worldly ambition, lightly dusted with 1 part pretentious spirituality. So a good answer would be medical missionary neurosurgeon. Or missionary hedge fund manager. I found this hypocrisy to be extraordinarily irritating, so I told people I was going to be a missionary mercenary conducting combat operations for Christ. After all, someone has to give all those medical missionaries people to fix up. Little did I think that Creator was listening, and it turns out that Creator has a sense of humor. Because now I'm an activist for women and colonized indigenous peoples, of which I am neither. I specialize in examining systems and organizations through racial equality, gender equality, and post-colonial lenses to see if they accomplish their own stated justice goals. For example, I've been part of an effort to confront the lack of voices speaking on gender equality within conferences dealing with social justice issues and overall failures to integrate gender into the Christian justice movement. I've also been on the other side helping to plan conferences that deal with justice issues and gender equality. I was asked to answer the question, what has not been addressed or challenged by Christians that stalls gender justice? So apologies to the internationals. I can only speak out of my own experience, which is domestic, so some of it may not apply to you. But moving on, the first thing I'll mention is that is our tendency not to take the sin of patriarchy seriously as a church. So by tolerating the male as a default representation of humanity, we make the female the lesser. This initially subtle devaluation forms a backdrop which universally devalues both women and God. It's not simply in our language, but in our conceptualization of God. So in English, God is represented as male, he referring to God as capitalized. So the person who encounters the text for the first time, God is not just male, but he is very male, or God is very male. In our normal language, male stands in for human, etc., or man stands in for human, etc. This form of everyday patriarchy creates a backdrop which normalizes extreme patriarchal structures. If we understand and work to resist patriarchal norms, we are more sensitive and less tolerant of what are actually misogynistic and sinful extremes. How often do we notice these subtle inequalities, and how often do we demand or suggest change? And I would say, if you're not going to suggest a demand a change, at least point and laugh when you hear. So I'll give you one example, right? So that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Women, please remain seated until the ride has come to a complete stop and enjoy your stay in the patriarchal kingdom. So just don't tolerate it, and when you challenge it, people will begin to see, like, oh, that's not normal. Why do we do things that way? The second element of not taking sin seriously is the lack of integration within the pursuit of justice. So it's logical to believe that gender equality should be integral in the pursuit of justice, but often it becomes either invisible or explicitly secondary. For example, if we could just solve race, class, poverty, environment first, then we could concentrate on gender. While these causes are important, they are not more important than gender equality and very likely can't be solved without an intersectional approach that includes gender. The problem manifests itself within various justice causes when women are called upon or forced to sacrifice their voice in favor of male leadership, thus replicating one form of oppression while claiming to challenge another. In the church, this often takes the form of what I call the bad medicine of dying to self. That is, calling those with the least amount of power to give theirs up first. Justice requires intentionality. It does not trickle down. How you do justice matters. Justice is not attainable without just process and inherently requires integration of gender equality into any justice effort. The third element of not taking sin seriously is the church fails to practice lamentation. And I think this is particular to the American church because of our individuality. Lamentation means to mourn aloud. It's a group act, not an individual act, and it's definitely not just between you and God. Western culture tells us to get over it, which is actually a very unloving and uncompassionate ideal. In contrast, deep woundings require deep and often communal reflection. Lamentation or grieving really is getting through it. Lamentation is an empathy-growing experience both for the victim and the victim's supporting community. Such liminal space builds articulation. The victim emerges validated with a powerful story, and communities emerge informed and ready to deal with issues head-on and with strength and solidarity. Through common experience, communities can take coordinated action that has actual relevance to the victim. North Park professor Soon-Chan Ra states, "Lament compels us to hear the voice of the marginalized. It is the marginalized, not the privileged, who will judge whether our efforts at gender equality are successful or not. We are the body. We already share each other's fates. We should share each other's stories as well, because we are stronger when we do." And the fourth element of not taking sin seriously is the third way. It's a relatively new development as far as I'm aware of. It is the idea that the solution to gender inequality is neither complementarian nor egalitarian, but something entirely new. The allure of the third way is that it appears to be objective, novel, moderate, individual, and nonconformist. For those who profess the third way, it's much more of a staunch belief than a well-developed doctrine. Why? Because I've asked someone to articulate the third way, and they say things like, "Well, there's got to be some right from both camps," and I'm thinking, you just told me you didn't want anything from either camp. Anyway, why the third way fails? We're commanded, primarily because from biblical perspective, we're commanded to weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn. This is clearly a call to empathy, not objectivity. The third way does not recognize a power differential between women who are oppressed and the overarching patriarchal system that oppresses them. Third wayers tend to see the egalitarian-complementarian conflict as an easily refereed fight between two equally matched and equally morally suspect boxers. As an actual participant in the struggle, I see the conflict more along the lines of a woman fleeing from a horde of proof text mumbling zombies. That is, there is a definite power differential and an immediacy that is not addressed through any objective third way. Post-colonial philosopher Paulo Freire states that washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. The third way is basically an attempt to simultaneously moderate the oppressor and the oppressed. But moderating the oppressed always results in more oppression, regardless of how moderated the oppressor is. Cherokee missiologist Randy Woodley states, "Shalom is tested in the margins. If we don't place our focus on those in the margins, our efforts are inherently incapable of enacting shalom." A second topic under what has not been addressed or challenged by Christians that stalls gender justice, and this one will probably hit some people right at home, is our sometimes inability to make a clear distinction between gender justice and gender injustice. In some ways, Our movement is culturally captive to an ideal of niceness, which can hinder our ability to speak out against injustice. If gender equality is gender justice, then what is gender injustice? In other words, do we believe enough in our cause to recognize and call out injustice when we see it? If we aren't willing to call complementarianism or patriarchy injustice, then egalitarianism becomes just another innocuously valid alternative interpretation. However, interpreting or identifying patriarchy as injustice and the proponents of patriarchy, no matter how nice they may be, as agents of injustice, this moves our cause from hobby to indispensable faith principle. Identification as egalitarian is no longer optional, and the burden falls on complementarians to prove that there can be justice without equality. The third element of what has not been addressed or challenged by Christians that solves gender justice is a struggle for language, being clear on the meaning and expression of the term egalitarian. Historically speaking, when hierarchicalists wore out their welcome as hierarchicalists, they shed their old skin and became complementarians. A term they co-opted from those who were at the time gender egalitarians. I am noticing in some of my social justice circles that I travel in that the term complementarian is becoming an undesirable liability. That's not to say that complementarians are giving up their doctrine, just that they don't want the baggage that comes with the title. Gender hierarchy, logically and biblically, should be a difficult position to defend. Consequently, those that seek to practice it must evolve new strategies to survive. There will always be hardcore complementarians or hierarchalists or whatever they choose to call themselves who are explicit and unapologetic about their position. Those people tend to be self-identified. That's not what I'm concerned about. The trend that concerns me is the co-option of the term egalitarian by those who do not practice the full equality of women. As we saw with the term complementarian, there is a precedent for this co-option. What this can look like is hierarchicalists hiding as egalitarians, enacting complementarian policies within supposedly egalitarian organizations. For example, I attended a congregation from a denomination that explicitly ordains women. But when I asked a member of the pastoral search committee why we were not seeing any women candidates, that committee member openly admitted that when a candidate was discovered to be a woman, she was instantly washed on the basis of gender alone. See, complementarians don't read faith statements. They just go where they want to. At least this one did. Another erosion of the term egalitarian comes from poor descriptions of egalitarianism given by people who make up their own definition. They genuinely think they're egalitarian, but they are not. I'll give you two examples. A panelist on at a gender conference who self-identified as egalitarian was asked what a good egalitarian model of church governance looks like. His reply was a church with a only male elder board getting feedback from a non-voting women's council. On the same panel, there was a supposed egalitarian who tried to argue who tried to present the egalitarian argument as a position based on legal rights rather than giftings. These are both extremely problematic expressions of what it means to be egalitarian. And I was about to call Mimi and say, hey, can I go and repossess someone's egalitarian card? So why focus on the definition and expression of egalitarian? Egalitarian is now being recognized. Yep, it's a thing. If complementarianism is not egalitarianism, it shouldn't be called egalitarianism, just as slaveholders are not abolitionists. Abandoning the truth is abetting in a system of lies. So the last element that has not been addressed or challenged by Christianity that solves justice, I'm hesitant to call this challenge. I would say I'm starting to see some movement on this front, and I encourage it to continue. Is the question, what approaches are we as egalitarians using to reach out to non-academics? Where are our images, our arts, our film, our poetry, our new media? Scholarship tickles the ears of the learned, but it is the songs of the bards that melt the hearts of the people. Egalitarians should consider the use of images, lyrics, and poetry not simply as personal expressions of individual members, but as corporate calls to action. As egalitarians, we shouldn't feel the need to fight on grounds chosen by complementarians. When was the last time you saw someone arguing against a poem or trying to debate a photograph? Art, narrative, poetry, song, film recognize the struggles of the oppressed and invite the community in lament, in communion, and in celebration. Our stories are undeniably powerful because they are true and in some cases can be conveyed without words or citations. In doing so, we value and validate our experiences, moving our cause beyond the academic world of journals and papers into more holistic and wider-reaching forms of expression. So, in summary, take the sin of patriarchy seriously, fight inequality and integrate equality wherever possible, commune in pain and celebration, and don't ignore the sufferings of others in favor of your own understanding of the situation. Boldly call out gender injustice Be clear on the meaning and expression of the term egalitarian. Don't be afraid to question those who claim the title but don't uphold its principles. Be prepared to communicate our cause in ways other than the written word, and keep the message but tune the medium to your intended audience. So, don't vote me off.